What is up, guys? Team Feels here with another video, and today we're doing a look at my most recent Burning Abyss deck profile. I just took this to locals today. I haven't been to locals in a little while. I ended up going 3-1, which is cool. Made top 4, which is also sweet. Got, I think, 3 or 4 prize packs out of it, something like that. I already opened them, didn't pull anything special, so I usually don't do any kind of openings on the channel anyways, which I think most people are used to. But I'm going to show you guys my list, what I'm playing, my thoughts on everything, things that I'm going to possibly change for the near future, and obviously an impending ban list that could be coming up soon could also impact that. But before we hop into the video, if you guys are not subscribed already, you already know the drill. Hit the subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and obviously like the video. It definitely helps out with all of my analytics. But let's go ahead and jump right into my locals report for my X1 Burning Abyss deck profile. All right, so to start the video, before I go completely through the deck list, I want to talk about my matchups. Round 1, I played against an invoked player, and I ended up 2-0ing him, which was pretty cool. I just had all the trap cards that I needed, and he didn't see nearly enough cards that he would have needed for his deck to fully function. So I was able to 2-0 the invoked player, which is pretty sweet. Round 2, I played against Prank Kids. That was also, I believe, another 2-0. Yes, that was a 2-0. Once again, traps came in clutch. Game 1, Imperial Order was flipped, and that very quickly prompted a Game 2. Game 2, I believe I resolved the Torrential, and then I had a Tour Guide, and he had no outs for it. So that was basically the end of that. Round 3 was against Drytron. Drytron was my only loss for the day. I lost in game 3 because I milled 2 Torrential off of my Dante. I got greedy because I wanted to try and chain block with whatever I mill, but instead I ended up losing 2 Torrentials out of it, which was definitely less than optimal. But I took game 1, I lost game 2, and I lost game 3 only because the Torrential was milled. If it wasn't for milling the Torrential, I probably would have had it because Trap Trick would have gotten me the Torrential. He wouldn't have had any plays, and I had a Tour Guide for a follow-up, knowing what he had in hand was unable to negate anything on my field. And then the last round, once again, was another Prank Kids matchup, put against 2 Prank Kids today, which isn't a bad thing. And I resolved Torrential Tribute on him 3 times, and he picked up his cards, he scooped, and he's like, yep, you got it. And actually, that was game 1. Game 2, when I 2-0'd him, he flipped Tikaboo on me, so I couldn't do much, but I Torrentialed him to where he didn't have any Prank Kids left, and he was basically trying to top deck into Prank Kids pranks, and he didn't see it, so I literally just normal summoned a Seer and just kept swinging at him directly with Seer until he had no life points left, which was kind of comical, if I'm being honest. But let's go ahead and jump into the deck itself. That was basically the overall report. Essentially going, if you want to count every single individual game, going 7-2. If you want to count just the match records, then it would be 3-1. But taking a look at the monster lineup, first and foremost, we're playing 3 graphs because 3 graph is definitely a necessity. You definitely want to use this card turn 1 to start your plays and set up your combo board. Opening this with another BA or just Tour Guide alone is good. Gets you exactly where you want to be, and you get to special summon your Burning Abyss monster from the deck. I did see graph a decent amount during the day, which was good. There was one point where I milled 2 off of like a Dante mill, and I was like, that's kind of unfortunate, but it was it ended up being okay in the long run. Then everything else that I played for like the major names for BA was 2-ofs. So I played 2 Seer. Normally I'm a very large advocate for 3, and if you watch my videos, you know that I typically hate seeing people play just 2 Seer. However, I wanted to try it out. I wanted to see how it worked. It wasn't bad. Here's my one complaint though, as to why I like playing 3. Because I have terrible luck with mills, and if I mill 3 cards, almost every single time that I milled 3 cards, I saw a Seer. It happened so much today. I was like, all right, I'm like, that's not good. We don't need that to happen. So I kind of want to play 3, but the list is kind of tight on space because I am only playing 40. I didn't want to go over 40 today, and I stuck at the 40 cards, and it was pretty good. But 2 Seer is what I played. I think that it's still functional, but I personally prefer 3, which most people know. But 2 was acceptable, I guess. Played 2 Skarm. I almost wish I played 3 of this, honestly. The Skarm came up almost every single game, grabbing tour guides, grabbing graphs, or whatever else I needed. At times grabbing like a Farfa, that way I could pitch it off of like a Karma Cut, Dino-Miscus or something like that, and get 2 banishes for the turn, which is really sweet. But yeah, Skarm was fantastic, being able to search an end phase. Absolutely loved it. 2 Farfa, this was perfectly fine. I didn't see a reason to play anymore. I think I resolved this card twice the entire day. And I didn't think it was the craziest card in the entire world, but it was there when I needed it to be there, which is all that really mattered. Then for the one-ofs, 1 Barbar, 1 Calcab, 1 Libic, and 1 Alec. So to discuss these, we'll start with the Barbar. This would have come up in the Prank Kids matchup, but he didn't have any other monsters to summon, so I literally just played the Barbar out and kept swinging with it. I'm sorry, the Seer out and kept swinging with it. I searched the Barbar off of a Skarm with the intentions of, you know, being able to beat over whatever Prank Kids monster he summoned, but he didn't have any left, so it didn't even matter. The burn effect for Barbar never came up either, which is also important to note, but I also didn't have any games that went into time, so that's probably a big part of it. Then the Calcab, I didn't resolve this once. I sided this out most of the time, and every single time I sided it out, I almost wished I kept it in. So I don't know. The Calcab could be really good. Could be really, really good depending on your matchup, and kind of baits some back row out, which is pretty sweet, not gonna lie. So having the Calcab as a resource in that manner is definitely of the utmost significance, because you can just kind of make your opponent use cards that they don't necessarily want to use at a certain point by forcing them to. Then the Libic came up quite a bit, actually. I think I resolved Libic at least 4 or 5 times today at the minimum. Whether I discarded it and then triggered it afterwards, or I dumped it from deck for something. Libic was fantastic, being able to special summon from hand and negate whatever I summon. There were times where I summoned a Graph, there were times where I summoned a Seer, and anytime that I did that, it was just very, very helpful in excelling my plays forwards, allowing me to basically build my board up even further so my opponent couldn't break it. Then lastly was the Alec. Card never came up. It's the one BA monster that I always want to cut, but I always want to have a certain number of names in the deck, so I never end up cutting it, despite the fact that I cannot stand playing this card. Could it come up? Absolutely. There are times where like you can dump it against Tri-Brigade and negate one of their monsters on the field before they use the effect, which in that manner it is absolutely useful. However, I didn't play against any Tri-Brigades today, so Alec was kind of useless. I almost think I should have sided this out rather than the Calcab because of the matchups I had. But it didn't really make too much of a difference for the most part, because I still came out with a decent amount of wins. But that's the BA lineup. We're going to hop on over to the rest of the monster lineup, which, of course, we have our triple tour guide. MVP of the day. This card just came up every single game, actually. I slapped this down every single game. I think it got Imperm twice and maybe Veilered once, and I think Ashed once. But it still like was crazy because I had follow-up plays with Tour Guide that I would be able to search on the next turn by like discarding cards from hand or dumping cards from deck off of other effects that I have. So Tour Guide was fantastic, and it still did resolve a decent amount of times. It was just a few times that it got hit, but it was like at the point in the game where it was too late for my opponent to recover, so their interruption didn't even do anything for him, and Tour Guide basically won me so many games because of that, which is really cool. Then we have 3 copies of Fiend Griefing, basically 3 more Burning Abyss names. The card's ridiculous, so ridiculous. Love Fiend Rhino. Like this card, I would normal summon it, special a BA, and it's the same exact thing as opening Tour Guide or opening Graph in a BA. it definitely did a lot of work being able to dump a Fiend. And there were other times where I would be able to send the Rhino, and then I would send the following card in the deck, which is our copy of Absolute King Backjack, and then Backjack would trigger, and when the Backjack would trigger, I would just stack the top of the deck for whatever I needed according to his effect, and then I would banish him to mill the top card of the deck also as his effect states in order to set a normal trap. Or there was one point where I actually discarded the Absolute King Backjack, and I think I discarded it off a Karma Cut, and then I stacked the top card of my deck as a monster. That way I could mill it and get the graveyard effect for the monster, and then keep going from there. So the Rhino Warrior and the Backjack were fantastic. I think 3 and 1 is a good ratio. Never play more than one of this. Like just one is fine. You never have to play more than one. You could cut Rhino to 2 if you wanted to. If you want to play like 3 Seer, that's totally up to you. But I think that this ratio was pretty decent. Moving on to the spells, though, because that is all the monsters. We only play 1 spell card in the entire deck, and that is 1 copy of Call by the Grave. I thought about playing Foolish Burial, and after thinking about it, I said, no, there's no reason for me to play Foolish Burial. It's not really a card that's going to help me out that much, because if I have the cards I need, I have the cards I need. Foolish really isn't going to do anything because my deck does one thing and one thing only, and that's make a Dante and set back row. That's literally the one purpose of the deck. Make Dante or Beatrice or whatever and set some back row. That's essentially all you're doing. So the 1 spell card was perfectly fine. No complaints, nothing that I would change about it, unless it gets banned, of course, and then we have a whole different story. But moving on to the trap cards, we played 3 counter traps, and that was the Triple Solemn Strike. I resolved this card a decent amount today, and every time I resolved it, it swayed the game heavily in my favor. I was able to pull off a Strike Torrential on Drytron, which is really cool. That was during game 1. I was able to Strike Torrential him, and that basically prompted the end of the game, because once again, when it came back to my turn, I normal summoned the tour guide, and then he had no other way to play around what I was going to do. So Solemn Strike, fantastic card, came up semi-frequently. It hit strike on a few monsters being attempted to summon, and then other times negating something like Herald of Ultimateness, which was pretty sweet. Then we play 3 copies of Trap Trick. I really wanted this to be better, and I think that the card is good. Obviously, the card's fantastic for the deck. It serves the deck it does such a service for the deck, I should say. And my only problem is that I drew a couple games, and I typically sided one out during games 2 and 3, and siding the 1 copy out was actually really helpful and beneficial for the cards that I was siding in. So I almost want to play just 2 copies of Trap Trick, which I did for a long time, and I might go back to that variation depending on how further events go when I play in them. But today I played 3, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't exactly my personal preference. Then we have 3 copies of Torrential Tribute. This was definitely one of the MVPs. This card won me so many games, especially against Prank Kids. This card is just like a blowout against Prank Kids. They had virtually nothing that they could do whatsoever against this card, and every single time I flipped the Torrential against anyone, they basically kind of rolled their eyes in the back of their head like, oh great, here we go, I'm gonna lose now. So and every time I flipped the Torrential, actually, funny enough, I had a tour guide in hand. That way on the follow-up I could just keep playing, and nobody enjoyed that except for me. So Torrential, definitely the one of the MVPs for the day. I'd say for the trap lineup that Torrential was the MVP for the day. Then we have some banish stuff. We have, and I'm just going to show these all as one, actually. So we have 3 copies of Dino-Miscus, 2 copies of Karma Cut, and actually it's discard cards, I should say, and 2 copies of Phoenix Wing Wind Blast. So I think that the 3-2-2 lineup was perfect. There were a couple games where I sided out 1 Dino-Miscus, which wasn't bad. It was just that I wanted to side in other cards that I thought were more useful, and the Dino-Miscus was definitely helpful in that respect. I think that one of the greatest parts about Dino-Miscus is the fact that you don't discard for cost. It's part of the effect. So your opponent can't like chain something to whatever you're discarding. Just for an example, they can't like DD Crow whatever you discard or get rid of it in some way, shape, or form to where it wouldn't be able to trigger afterwards. So that's the great part about Deinamiscus. I never used its summon effect from the graveyard. It just never ever came up, which is fine. It's not necessarily always going to come up, but I think that if it did, it would have been helpful in some scenarios, but today it didn't, and that's perfectly fine. The Karma Cut was also fantastic. I banished a lot of monsters with Karma Cut today, which was sweet. I resolved Karma Cut and Torrential probably more than any other trap cards in the entire deck, and I was thoroughly pleased with the result of it. So definitely consider playing Karma Cut in this deck if you're not already. And then the Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, this was actually surprisingly good. So I used this against Prank Kids at one point, and I put his Dropsies back on top of the deck. And when I put the Dropsies back on top of the deck, he's like, all right, like I have nothing else to do. So he passes turn, and when he passes his turn, he also had another monster in grave. I believe it was an Effect Veiler. And I used a Fiend Griefing to shuffle the Veiler back, and was able to send a Skarm, and then I was able to use Skarm, search a Tour Guide, so on and so forth, and then it goes to my turn and I just comboed off. So it was really good in that respect. Additionally, when I had something like Anti-Spell Fragrance up, I was able to bounce one of their set spells to the top of the deck, and then they had to reset it and they couldn't use it on their following turn, which was also really crazy. So Phoenix Wing and Blast was also a fantastic card for many reasons. Then we played the last copies for 2 ofs. We played 2 copies of Fiend Griefing. I don't think that 3 is necessary. I think that 2 is perfectly fine. I'm just hoping we get a hollow printing of this card at some point in the future, because it only has commons and that makes me sad. I want something that's a little shinier than the common that currently is in circulation. So fingers crossed that we get one, because that'd be pretty sweet for this deck, having more hollow cards to play. But overall, there were a lot of cards I shuffled back. There were times where I dumped Farfa, there were times where I dumped Skarm, times where I dumped Backjack. It's all very situational and depends completely on the deck that you're playing against and what the resources on your field are. So the Fiend Griefing was fantastic for so many different reasons. And lastly, of course, the one Imperial Order, the card that so many people are begging to be banned. And if you think the card should be banned, honestly, just click off the video right now, because this card does not need to be banned whatsoever. This card is perfectly fine for the game. You can chain to it. You have ways to play around it. If you cannot figure out a way to play around Imperial Order, I apologize for you being a terrible player. Just go and figure out how to get better, because currently you suck at the game. Imperial Order definitely is perfectly healthy. So sorry, that came off a lot more harsh than it should have. But yeah, if you can't play around Imperial Order, you're a bad player. But that is the main deck, 40 cards. I'm going to hop on over to the extra deck and show you guys what I played. Alrighty, so extra deck time. Extra deck is pretty standard, I think. I feel like there's like 1 or 2 things that I change in here from other lists that I've played in the past, in addition to other lists that I've seen online. Because I take a little bit from what I've done in the past, a little bit from what I've seen in other profiles, and I kind of just mash them together, and I try and look for the best result out of everything. So looking at the Xyz Monsters, I played 2 copy of Dante. I don't think you need to play more than 2. I also don't own a 3rd Italian one yet, so I'm trying to hunt for one of those, which obviously is on my list of things to pick up. And even if I had a 3rd one, I wouldn't play a 3rd one. It would just sit in a binder with my collection of stuff that I won't get rid of. So the Dantes were fantastic. I almost never made a 2nd one during each game. Usually I was able to just recycle the one with the Seer, and that was good enough. So I feel that 2 is perfectly fine. And if you do get into a grind game, at least you have a 2nd one in there. So then we played, for the other rank 3, we played 1 copy of Fortune Tune. This card was pretty good. It wasn't the craziest thing in the world, but it definitely served a purpose in one of the games against that Drytron game, actually. It was able to help me get into a Zeus, but the Zeus really didn't do anything. Like he just had too many resources. That was in game 3. He had too many resources, even though I cleared his board. So the Fortune Tune was decent, but it wasn't anything like super nuts. Still a good card though. Definitely play it if you wanna link climb. Then we played 1 copy of our Downward Magician. This was something that also I don't think came up. It might have come up once, but I still don't think it came up at all. Like, the card's good, like it's a really good card, but I just never had a point where using Downard to add another material was actually useful. So not a bad card, just today it didn't come up, which is perfectly fine. Then of course we play the one Beatrice because like it's Beatrice. You want to end on this card in Masquerena, obviously. That's like one of the best plays you can do. And it was definitely helpful. The other thing I want to point out is that there are some people who are saying Beatrice should be banned to hurt decks like Drytron and Virtual World. And once again, I apologize that you are that bad of a player that you think Beatrice is the problem card. If you really think Beatrice is the problem card, I would suggest, one, that you go and get your eyes checked, and two, that you also take my advice that I gave on the Imperial Order debacle, and that is to be a better player and realize that this card is not the problem because you have some sort of mental issue slowing you down. But then we have 2 copies of Zeus as the last XYZ monster. I think 2 is completely reasonable and justifiable. There's no reason to be playing 1 of this card. If you're playing 1, please go get a second one. I don't care if you get ultras from the Megaton, it doesn't matter. Play a second copy of this card because you need it. You need a second copy for grindy games. There are going to be grindy games where you have to go into a second one, and if you don't have it, you're going to regret it. Trust me. Today, however, I did not have one of those grindy games that did that. I had games that were all pretty consistent. They weren't like super long. Like I said, nothing went into time, which was good. I made Zeus, I think, 2 times today. That was it, because my traps were able to just clear everything. But there are definitely some scenarios where making a Zeus is your only option to out your opponent's board. Those are all the XYZ monsters, though. The other card that we play that is a non-link monster before we get to the link monsters is our 1 copy of Purple Dante. I think I made this 2 or 3 times today, and it was able to net me some extra cards and gain a little bit of extra advantage, but it wasn't anything like super crazy. It was just decent. Like, I'd say it was an average card, and it served the purpose that it's here for, but it definitely didn't, like, you know, do an excessively large amount for me. Moving on to the link monsters, though, we played 1 copy of Cherubini. I think I made this twice today to link climb, and that was about it. There was at one point where I didn't want to like make certain cards with it. Like, I could have gone to a unicorn, but I only had 1 card in hand, and it was a trap that I wanted to set. So I ended up just leaving this with a Scarm pointing to it. My opponent attacked this, and I sent the Scarm instead and was able to search and keep this, which was pretty cool. Then we played 1 copy of IP Masquerena. This was one of the MVPs of the day, honestly, from the extra deck. I would make IP Masquerena and my Beatrice and set a few back row and pass, and that was usually enough for my opponent to scoop it up because I had enough interruptions to where they couldn't play. I didn't really have any issues with anyone negating the IP. I think it got negated once, and that's it. So the IP was definitely a MVP for the day. Then we played for the Nightmare package 1 Phoenix and 1 Unicorn. No Cerberus necessary. It never came up. I never wanted it to come up, so I just stuck with the Nightmares that I had, and I felt that, well, I have Cerberus, I just didn't feel like switching anything out for Cerberus. So I just stuck with these 2 because I felt they were the most optimal to play, as most people typically agree with. And the Phoenix came up once or twice, and the Unicorn came up a lot with the Masquerena. So I'd say Unicorn was a little bit better, also for link climbing into things like access code. That's very important to note too. But yeah, Unicorn was pretty sweet. Then we played 1 copy of Topologic Trisbana. This is like the 15th card in the extra deck, but you can banish your opponent's back row in those grindy matchups and really hurt them, which is crazy how powerful this card can be and how much it can really do to really just shut down your opponent and not allow them to have their back row that they so preciously try to guard. Then for the Link Force, as I stated, we do play the access code. This card came up 3 times today. There was one point where I could have made an access code, but I was on the 4th summon, and I said, I bet you this guy has Nibiru in hand, and I already had enough on board for game, so I didn't make the access code. I just swung for game, and then afterwards, when I swung for game, he's like, man, he's like, I wish you went for one more summon, and then he showed me his hand, and he did have the Nibiru. So I'm glad I didn't play it out on that play, but there were other games where the access code was fully necessary, and it helped me out a whole lot. Then lastly, the 1 copy of Boral Sword. I think I made Boral Sword 2 or 3 times today too. Whenever I made Boral Sword, it was literally just an OTK. Some guy thought that his attack gain was only for that one battle, which it's not. It's not for that one battle, so please keep that in mind. You don't just gain half of their attack for one battle, so you can really swing in for some big damage for the turn. And it was exact. It was a little over exact game. I think 500 over or something like that. So really good card, fantastic. Helped out a whole lot with clearing some games up pretty quickly. But that is the extra deck. We're gonna hop on over to the side deck and take a look at what I used to beat the meta and cards that just didn't ever come up. So let's hop on into it. Alrighty, so as you can see, I actually do have a hand trap in my side deck, and we'll obviously discuss that first because it's the card on top of the side deck, and I'll show essentially why I played this as we progress through the side deck. But we played 3 copies of Ally of Justice Cycle Reader. This was for our Drytron matchup. It came up once, but the guy had I believe he had a ghost spell, so it didn't even matter. As much as I wanted the Cycle Reader to be important, it wasn't, which sucks, but it was there for a reason. I saw it and it just didn't resolve the way I wanted it to. It happens though, that's just the nature of the game. Then I played 1 copy of Necroworld Banshee and 1 Zombie World. This was primarily for Tri-Brigade. I didn't end up playing against any Tri-Brigade. I think there were 3 people who were playing the deck. I just didn't get paired up against them. My brother was one of them. He ended up going 3-1 as well, making the top 4 cut too, which is pretty sweet. So I didn't play against any Tri-Brigade, but in theory, this is a really good package to have against it. Then for the other spells that we played, I played 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. This came up in the Drytron matchup. It was good because I was able to shut off his board. However, I don't think that I was able to do much because I didn't have enough resources. So I opened up, like I said, I opened up 2 of them, a Dinomischus, a Seer, and 1 or 2 other cards that didn't really push my game state forward. I opened up a tour guide, which was good, but he just had too many resources that made it so I couldn't completely clear his board, which is okay, it happens, but kind of disappointing the card didn't do what I wanted it to do. Still a good card though, keep that in mind. One of the MVPs of the side deck for going second was 3 copies of Evenly Matched. Every time I resolved this against a Prank Kids player, they basically cried because there wasn't much they could really do. The card is just nuts. So powerful, being able to out multiple cards on the board, especially against a deck like Prank Kids, which doesn't really set up much negations unless they do the Toad play with Poly on first turn. But overall, the Evenly Matched was really good to out a bunch of back row that people had. Then this is probably the MVP card of the side deck, and that is 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. I cannot state enough how great this card was. Every time I flipped this card, my opponent was probably saltier than they were about me flipping Imperial Order, because they're like, oh, like he's siding even more floodgates for my deck, and it worked very well. So even if Imperial Order does get banned, it doesn't matter. I still have 3 Anti-Spell Fragrance, and I'll just put all 3 in the main deck, and then I'll just main deck 3 Anti-Spell and make people equally as mad as they were before with me flipping Imperial Order. And now I basically just have 3 copies of Imperial Order for a whole 2 turns basically. So Anti-Spell is fantastic. Then the last card that we play, this card is the reason that Cycle Reader was played in the first place, and that is Orchest Crescendo. So basically what you do is you can send this card off of Beatrice's effect from your deck, and then you can banish it to add Ally of Justice Cycle Reader, because Ally of Justice Cycle Reader is a Dark Machine monster. So because it's a Dark Machine monster, your Crescendo is actually able to search it, which is really crazy, because if you don't open it in your opening hand, you can just use Beatrice's effect, send the Crescendo, then you get to search a cycle reader for free, which is really, really cool. So that's actually something that I wish came up. The card didn't end up doing anything in that Drytron matchup, but I did, as I stated, open a cycle reader that was negated by Bell, which does happen, so there wasn't much I could really do about that. However, in theory, it is a fantastic package to play. And going forwards, I do have some cards that I want to throw into the deck, and I'm just going to show them to you guys so you can see what I want to do. I want to play, and this is this card is side deck. Side deck 3 copies of Booby Trap E. The reason behind this card is that it allows you to activate essentially a continuous trap from your hand or graveyard. Basically, it sets it, but you can activate it at the turn it's set. So you can go ahead and reset like a popped anti-spell or Imperial Order that your opponent hit right back onto your board, and then flip it back up, and now they have to try and play around a second one, which most of the time is it's a little bit of a struggle for a lot of decks. So Booby Trap E is fantastic. I wish I picked these up at locals today after seeing you know, how good the card could be in theory, so I opted to grab a playset. And then lastly, the cards that I want to add, depending on how the ban list goes, is 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill. I primarily picked these up so I could have them as a part of my collection for stuff, but I feel that the card could be really, really good depending on the matchup that you're playing against. So I thought that the Breakthrough Skill was actually pretty sweet. So I'll probably play this in the near future, but we will find out depending on the ban list. However, though, that does bring us to the end of the video. If you guys want to see in the future maybe me playing at locals with this deck and doing some matchups, I can probably do that. I don't know if I'm going to upload a video next week. Probably not. I will be in Florida for vacation, going down with a few friends to Universal and hanging out down there. So if you guys are in Universal and you actually know who I am, which most of you probably won't because I don't show my face on the channel, but if you guys happen to bump into me and you think it's me, go ahead and say hi if you live down in Orlando and you're going to Universal. But if you guys enjoyed the video, if you did, obviously give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button, turn the notification bell on, and leave a comment down below about how much you love Burning Abyss. But for right now, this is Team Yugi Feels signing out.